Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
My parents adopted our family cat as a kitten about 10 years ago, and it's hard to imagine life without him. We took him in from a local shelter that was running a special on adoption fees, and I knew I wanted to take him home the moment I saw him. He's gray and somewhat fluffy, so we named him Stormy because he resembled an adorable rain cloud. And just like thunder from a rain cloud, he would always announce himself when he came home from exploring outdoors, meowing all the way inside. Sometimes he would return with gifts and trophies from outside, such as small mice or the occasional bird, which always disgusted my mom. I didn't mind as much because I knew he was just being a cat, proud of his hunting prowess. One time I didn't hear him return from outside was on a particularly hot day when I was 15 years old. The heat had been unbearable for days, so much so that I decided to open all the windows to let some cool air inside. Mom and I were sitting at our kitchen table having an early dinner when the flap in the cat door opened, causing us both to look up and see him sauntering toward the living room as though he had just returned from a successful hunt, but without leaving anything behind to show for it. It seemed odd to me that he came in so quietly, but there wasn't anything else at the time to cause concern. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept tossing and turning, hoping Stormy would just curl up next to me, but he also refused to relax and sat at the edge of my bed like he could see something I couldn't see. Each time I felt myself drifting off, I would feel a slight movement across my feet. At first I assumed it was Stormy again, but then I heard faint scratching sounds coming from underneath my bed. When I turned on the light to investigate, I found a tiny hand reaching out from under my bed, trying desperately to grab onto whatever soft object was nearby. I quickly pulled it free, only to find another hand hanging below it, clawing at the base of the wall. To my shock, when I looked under my bed, I saw two sets of eyes staring back at me, wide open and glimmering, and Stormy was nowhere to be found. I ran downstairs in a panic, searching everywhere for signs of Stormy's presence. After 10 minutes of intense search, I couldn't believe what I saw. The same sets of eyes stared back at me, this time from around the corner of the hallway, and there was no mistaking it. I could feel them watching me, as if they were waiting for me to turn around. My parents had left me home alone while they were on an overnight trip, so I needed to deal with this on my own. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it must have been something that Stormy brought back from outside, but I really wasn't sure. One way or another, there was something in my house that shouldn't have been there. When my parents arrived home the next morning, I mentioned I thought something might have come in through the cat door. We searched through every room, but all we found was Stormy, sleeping peacefully in his usual spot. This wasn't good enough for me, though. I insisted we call animal control, who came over the next morning to help remove whatever pest had made its way inside. But just like before, when he searched our house, there was no sign of any animals other than Stormy, who had taken a liking to the animal control worker, gently rubbing against his leg and purring. When I asked Mom whether she noticed anything strange in the house, she said that the day she and my dad returned from vacation, she thought she had seen a pair of eyes staring at her in the darkness of her bedroom, but that she quickly shrugged it off, assuming it was just Stormy on one of his regular excursions around the house. I knew that there was more to it than that, as I began remembering what seemed unusual about the eyes looking back at me in the dark. As much as I wanted to believe that I had seen multiple animals, the two sets of eyes looked like they were attached to the same animal, due to the fact that they seemed to move in sync, blinking and darting around while searching in the dark. What disturbed me even more was that whatever I was seeing seemed to have known where I was going, and when I would go there. It was almost like whatever it was knew me. To top it all off, it never seemed to leave my room at night. I'd lie awake in bed thinking I could feel it standing behind me, watching me fall asleep. But as soon as I would turn my bedside lamp on, all I would see is Stormy, curled up and sleeping soundly on my bed or the chair in my bedroom. Even when I continued to hear scratching on the floor in my closet some nights and underneath my bed other nights. The more confident I became about what I was seeing at night, I started to tell my mom about what I experienced, and she insisted that she still thought it must have been Stormy being playful in the middle of the night. She suggested that perhaps he was upset that she had gone out of town without him that night, so he was trying to scare us by making us think we were being stalked by some kind of monster. She knew that this was ridiculous, of course, so she laughed it off and told me not to worry about it. When I brought up the little prying hands I had seen coming from under the bed, she said my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, or Stormy must have been trying to playfully swat at me from under the bed. Not wanting to seem like I was making a big deal out of it, I let the issue go, but still exercised a great deal of caution when I would go to bed, reasoning that Stormy must have let some sort of creature loose in the house, this time alive, compared to the usual trophy mouse. A few nights after the animal control worker checked the house for any feral animals, I got ready for bed like I would any other night, but noticed Stormy was following me around closely, meowing and rubbing against me like he wanted extra attention. He continued staying close to me until I laid down, and as I reached for the light switch near my bed, I caught a glimpse of a small hand reaching from underneath the bed as I turned the light off. It was only a quick flash, and I couldn't quite make it out, but I remember feeling like I should look again. As soon as I did, there was nothing I could see in the space beneath the bed but the thick legs of my bed frame and a few piles of dust bunnies. I thought that if I kept looking back at the space beneath my bed, I might see the hand reappear, but it never did. As I laid there in bed, I decided that if I didn't stop overthinking things, I might never fall asleep again. I drifted off to sleep with Stormy sitting upright at the foot of my bed, hoping this would be the last I would see of whatever was under my bed. The next week, when I came home from school, as I walked through the front door, I heard my parents having a tense conversation. As I went upstairs, I saw my mom leaned up against her bedroom doorframe, talking to my dad, her eyes closed in frustration, and her right hand on her forehead. I asked what was going on, and my mom told me that over the past week, she and my dad had been getting phone calls and visits from animal control while I was in school. It began when they called to warn us that someone reported a severely wounded dog wandering around in the woods behind our house. She said that the worker had gone out to check the area, but as soon as he stepped foot into the wooded area, he tripped and stumbled into a shallow ditch. From there, he picked himself up, and in the process he discovered about 20 to 30 small animals that looked like they had been hunted by another animal and left behind. These included squirrels, birds, and rabbits, all of which were mortally wounded and abandoned. My dad was home at the time this was discovered, and he went out to see what the animal control worker had found. While he was describing the scene, he kept bringing up how awful it smelled, and that the smell was burned into his memory. While he helped clean up the remains, the animal control worker told him it could have been done by another animal higher up on the food chain. But he couldn't explain why they'd be left behind rather than eaten. My dad began to think it was almost as if whatever had done this did it out of spite, or maybe even to send a message. The next day, my dad went out and found a similar scene, though there were fewer animals left behind, which made him think that when the animal control worker stumbled onto them the day before, it had been a few days since the hunt began. He cleaned them up, meanwhile searching for any animals like bobcats or foxes skulking around, but never saw anything out of the ordinary. By the time she revealed all of this to me, it had been a couple days because they didn't want to freak me out while the whole situation was being figured out. They figured they would just be alert until it was resolved, and had been told that if they saw whatever animal was doing this, they should call animal control and someone would be right over. Though cleaning up would be our responsibility because it was becoming a daily occurrence. Immediately, my morbid curiosity got the better of me, and I said I was going to see it for myself when my dad stopped me and said there was no way without knowing what exactly was out there. He gave me a look that told me he was absolutely not going to change his mind, so I said okay, and immediately went to my room upstairs to find out how much I could see from my bedroom window facing the woods behind my house. I pulled a pair of binoculars I occasionally use for camping out of their case and began my investigation. As I peered into the woods, I noticed some movement in the leaves on the ground, but couldn't make out exactly what the source of the movement was. I checked for any other hunted animals, but it seemed like they had already been cleaned up by that point. As I used the binoculars to inspect the area, I heard a thump followed by a scratching sound on the hardwood floor in my bedroom, which made me jump. My heart raced as I strained to listen, expecting to hear a blood-curdling scream or some other horrific noise, but nothing came. I followed the screeching sound to the source and discovered it was coming from inside my closet. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should follow the noise further into the darkness of the closet and prepare to attack. Then I thought about the time I found a mouse in my dresser drawer and the trouble I almost got myself into trying to get rid of it, making a commotion using anything I could get my hands on as a makeshift weapon to slay the rodent. There was something wrong with the sound, which had taken on a life of its own. Something that sounded alive and angry, and made me feel like I was being watched. Nevertheless, I continued peering into the closet when Stormy leaped from his hiding spot under a row of hanging t-shirts and landed directly onto a small creature with skinny limbs sparsely covered with light brown fur. I recognized the arms as likely belonging to whatever had been prying its way out from under my bed, and gasped when the creature turned toward me, gurgling in a high pitch and frothing at its wide mouth while it struggled under the weight of Stormy. Its eyes looked like they were burning with rage, and as it held out its tiny fingers, I realized that the fingernails looked abnormally long and sharp, each one ending in a razor-like tip. Its face was mostly flat, but had a small snout, and it didn't seem to have any discernible ears or ear holes that I could see. If it had a tail and I hadn't seen its face, I would have likely thought it was some sort of small monkey, but its long and disturbingly wide mouth, and its gurgling cry, made it apparent I was seeing something otherworldly. Stormy flipped to his side and began kicking at the creature, which couldn't have been larger than an average squirrel. And I was stunned again when I saw that Stormy had a second set of eyes I had never seen before, above the eyes I had always known. They had an odd ethereal quality that gave me the impression that while they were part of his body, they existed somewhere between reality and some hidden place. While they didn't seem to take a physical shape, they appeared to be somewhat flat on his ears. Both sets of eyes moved in unison, and when he blinked I saw small flashes of light that dazed and subdued the small creature. After watching Stormy use his claws for several moments, the creature finally succumbed to Stormy's attacks and lay still and quiet, panting and gasping, as Stormy threw his paws out and rolled the small creature across the floor. I took this opportunity to reach for a nearby shirt that had fallen off a hanger when Stormy pounced, and quickly placed it over the creature, holding it close and feeling it squirm and kick. The gurgling sound began to pick up again, and I felt its claws begin to rip and tear away at the t-shirt. Not wanting to be harmed by whatever this thing was, I opened my bedroom window as quickly as I could with one hand, while the other held the creature close to my chest in the balled-up shirt. I quickly flung it outside the window, and as it fell to the ground, I saw it separate from the shirt and land on its back, kicking and flailing to try to regain its balance. Without so much as a limp, it ran into the woods, rocking side from side as it ran on its two spindly legs. As it approached the woods, the grass and leaves began rustling again, this time appearing to show movement leading directly to the creature I had flung out my window. I saw 4 or 5 similar creatures of roughly the same size approach it, and once the creature joined them, they immediately fled deeper into the wooded area away from my house. I shut the window and checked out my arm, and found I had thankfully only suffered a few small scratches, but nothing that broke skin. I turned to look at Stormy, who was still resting on the bed, appearing satisfied after a successful hunt, but the second pair of eyes was now gone. He softly meowed at me, and I walked over to pet him softly on his back. As he began to purr, I felt myself calm down and slow my breathing, after encountering whatever that thing was. I couldn't comprehend anything about the small creature or Stormy's sudden transformation, and I wanted nothing more than to turn back time to before any of this had started. That night, while pondering my encounter with the disgusting little creature, I considered whether it could have been what was hunting down the small animals behind my house. But I determined that couldn't have been possible, because whatever had been hiding in my closet was the same thing making noises in my room ever since the night the disturbances began. It also seemed like whenever I saw the creature, it acted like a rat that had been cornered with no place to run. Before the encounter, I thought Stormy could have been responsible for all the hunted animals behind my house, since he often brought home his prey to show off. But I had never seen him hunt as many as had been found by animal control. I surmised that the creatures outside must have been the ones hunting them down, not for sport or for food, but because they could. The strangeness of it all seemed too coincidental to me, and I wondered if confronting the creature exposed me to a side of Stormy that I wasn't supposed to see. I still don't know how Stormy was able to catch the creature or even see it in the first place, but I believe that the other creatures I observed out in the woods behind my house were fully aware that one of their own was missing, and their attacks against the animals their own size was a warning of what would come next if it wasn't returned to them. Just one of them was vicious, but manageable. The idea of taking on a whole pack of them was unthinkable. That night, I still felt on edge, and every little scratch or tap on the floor made me tense up. But as I checked for another little creature, it turned out to just be the sound of my parents' footsteps on the hardwood floor or other regular household noises. I was able to eventually fall asleep, comforted, knowing that Stormy was able to subdue the creature before I evicted it. The next day, and the day after, and the day after that, the animal attacks stopped, and my dad was able to finally find relief from disposing of what was being left behind. The animal control workers stopped by one day to check things out, and he also confirmed there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. My parents asked him whether any of our neighbors had experienced something similar, but he said nobody made any calls or reports aside from the initial report about the wounded dog. Things very quickly returned to normal, at least to everyone else. But the image of the frothing little beast had imprinted itself in my mind, and I knew it would be something I would have to carry with me. I haven't experienced anything like these events since that day, but my encounter with whatever that thing was made me believe that there are things unseen in this world, and Stormy must be privy to them. As he's gotten older, some of his darker patches of gray have gotten lighter, but what doesn't seem to have changed over the years are his eyes. His sense of alertness is as sharp as it was the day we took him home from the shelter, and beyond his face, I can still envision the second set of eyes. And when I lie in bed at night with Stormy at the foot of my bed, sometimes right before I nod off, I swear I can see them staring back at me again, all 4 eyes, softly shining in the dark.